Hey, I'm Tracy Clark-Flory.
I'm Amanda Monti, and you're listening to Dire Straits.
Today, we're talking about the 4B movement. Remember that? Last fall, the concept exploded in the US alongside the election of Donald Trump. Some called it a sex strike. The idea was that women were going to say no to men. No dating, no marriage, no sex, no babies. There were viral TikToks. It was all over the headlines. It sparked debates, backlash, mockery, and threats, and then the meme disappeared.
Nearly a year later, we are looking back at what happened to the 4B movement, or maybe more accurately, the 4B meme. We're also going to consider what's happened to conversations around celibacy, decentering men, and women's romantic and sexual refusals, as well as why 4B made so many people so angry, as we look a little closer at a growing distaste for women's pretty reasonable complaints about men.
We'll also talk about other models of sexual resistance, from lesbian separatism to ideas around radical eroticism. What can we learn from the rapid rise and fall of 4B? What was going on after the election? And where are we now?
This is a free episode, but we truly can't do this without your support. You can upgrade now at direstraitspod.com. That's straits with a GH, to get access to all of our episodes, special bonus content, a subscriber chat, and more. Thank you, as always, so much to our paid subscribers who make this work possible. We see you, we love you, we appreciate you.
Let's start by talking about the origins of 4B.
Okay. So the term originated in South Korea as a reaction to high rates of violence against women, also the gender pay gap, unequal division of labor in the home, and pronatalist policies. So it involved women refusing four things: dating, sex, marriage, and reproduction with men, having babies. In Korean, each of these words begins with a B, hence 4B. And, it was a movement that grew over several years.
Yeah. Writing in The Cut in 2023, Anna Louise Sussman reported on the 4B movement in South Korea. She wrote, "It is unclear how widespread or popular the 4B movement is, given its fluid online and offline nature and its evolution over the years, beginning sometime around 2015 or 2016, when a simple no marriage lifestyle grew to include a boycott of men and reproductive labor more broadly. One article estimated 50,000 adherents. Others have put the movement's numbers at under 5,000. There were, in the South Korean context, major issues with the movement. It was rife with transphobia. Sussman notes that there was a, quote, focus on cisgender women to the exclusion of trans women. Many of the online communities require verification with a photo ID attesting to the applicant's sex. There were even reports of women being asked to share videos of their Adam's apple for supposed verification before being allowed into certain online communities. There were also reports of homophobia. So a lot of issues.
A lot of issues.
Safe to say.
Safe to say. Yeah. Like
yes.
A very, turfy strain here.
Yes.
But when exactly did it show up in the US? Because I remember when we talked about it blowing up after the election, but it was kind of already reaching the States before that, right?
It was, yeah. It first showed up in the US in March of 2024, so many months before the presidential election. It showed up in these popular TikTok videos. I actually want to play us an example of a video from It's Diamond Dage, who had one of the most popular videos from that time.
In South Korea, women have been on this strike. I believe that if not already, it's definitely going to be underway here in the U.S. If you go on TikTok or any platform where women are talking about current issues, women are celibate more than they ever been. Women are of childbearing age. and they are not having kids, and marriages are either falling apart and women don't want to get married or prolonging. The 4B movement is already a thing. Women are tired. Women are fed up with these dudes. Women have had enough.
So, yeah, interesting, because this was many months before the presidential election. But the possibility of another Trump presidency was totally already looming. And obviously we were seeing this rising anti-woman conservative movement that is now like just so fully articulated.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, also just to jog our memories, like some of the other stuff that was going on around this time, the defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll against Trump in January of 2024. So like just a few months before this started to emerge, he had already been found liable for sexual abuse. And in this case, Carroll was awarded $83.3 million for defamation relating to his verbal attacks against her. So that was in the air. Then in early March, Trump became the presumptive Republican nominee, like officially, right? So isn't that interesting that even before he was elected, it's like the fact that that we're facing this possibility officially is happening right before this started to emerge. We have this man who has been found liable of sexual abuse, a man who just years earlier helped to overturn Roe v. Wade, running for president. I don't think it's a coincidence that this emerged at that time.
Right. Yeah. And also, again, on the heels of his first presidency and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right, where a lot of women were waking up to sort of what was happening.
Yes.
And 4B also came on the heels of the boy sober and decentering men phenomena, right?
Yes.
That was all emerging at the same time, or
it
a little
really
before?
was.
Yeah. I remember that at the time, I guess like roughly when this 4B stuff was first around, because I do remember reading that Cut piece, the piece at the Cut about the South Korean iteration of 4B, which I think is what brought a lot of U.S. awareness to it. I was researching women abstaining from sex in marriage and for a piece that I wrote for New York Times Magazine. And so I was thinking a lot about how even married women were resisting, you know, some of these heteronormative scripts, right? Obligatory sex in marriage, you know, and really considering like anything less than enthusiastic consent in marriage also felt wrong to them, you know, or something that they wanted to unpack at the very least. And I was like, I remember writing that piece and trying to kind of wrap my head around like what was happening in dating and sexual culture. So that boy sobriety, decentering men vibe. And it felt like women were rejecting not necessarily men en masse, like I think some of these creators were kind of saying, but that just so many elements of heterosexual life that we had previously normalized were, you know, being looked at with a new eye, like the idea of organizing a life around men or a man, and also the idea of organizing your sexual desire around men or a man's desire. And then, of course, this is also like right as the divorce discourse was exploding. And I remember like also researching like platonic life partners. And so there's just a lot of, I think, unpacking dating, sex, marriage.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it really was a time of women questioning the structure of their lives, it feels like, on all these different fronts, right? So it's interesting because the concepts of boy sober and decentering men were quite different from 4B, obviously. Boy sober was really about taking a temporary break from dating men after getting burnt out on dating. It wasn't about refusal so much as taking the time to find yourself, to reconnect with friends. The idea was that eventually you would return to love and sex. And then much of the decentering men discourse online was about strategizing so that you could sort of inoculate yourself against the punishing aspects of hetero dating by focusing on yourself, your friends, and not letting a man steal your heart and your time. So Boy Sober had been around for a minute, but it really did start to take off alongside those earliest 4B videos. Decentering Men had started to burble up earlier also, but it took off in 2024 right alongside the earliest 4B chatter. So you have this like sudden emergence of all these narratives that had kind of been in the mix, but then suddenly they're starting to kind of gain steam together.
Right, totally. And I remember you and I talking about all these trends coming up and like, you know, trying to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Do you remember we did that event at Womb House Books in Oakland, which is an amazing bookstore that is local to us, for those of you in the Bay Area.
Oh my gosh, go visit.
It's so great. But that was like September 2024, which is crazy because that was right before the election.
It was the before times. Yeah.
And it already felt so bad.
It felt pretty bad, but we had no idea. We had no idea how bad it was going to get.
Oh my God, I know. But we ended up talking with a young woman who was decentering men and who was an avid follower of some content creators on YouTube who were, you know, sort of teaching women with these like sort of online lessons, like how to do that work. I remember being so fascinated by it and like, I could get behind this. Like, this is really an interesting, but then also just fascinated by like the internet culture of it all.
Yes, totally. Right. Which I love that you like highlight that. Yeah, I had just written a piece actually about decentering men when we met up with that lovely young woman. And, you know, on its most basic level, of course, it makes total sense. You know, it's basically about resisting marriage and motherhood as these ultimate markers of success. It's about engaging in this like romantic deprogramming from toxic heteronormativity. I wrote about it being kind of like a Bechdel test for your life. Love all that. But there were facets of the discourse online that focused on restraint and self-surveillance in a way that felt punishing and blaming. I called it a diet for the heart because it was very much like, don't text too much, don't check social media, don't let yourself fall head over heels. And some of this advice would be with the express purpose of actually becoming more desirable to men. In other words, like decenter men in order to become more desirable to men.
Yeah, no, that's just a contradiction.
We don't yeah. And, you know, all these rules and strategies, but also the shaming and blaming language around like not being a pick-me or a doormat really reminded me of female dating strategy, which we've talked about on the pod, the dark feminine, but also old school dating books like The Rules. Red flag culture also comes to mind, which we just talked about. And obviously some of this advice can be very helpful.
Totally.
Some of it can also be turned into this tool that blames women for their romantic and sexual mistreatment, right?
Right. Well, this does seem like a tension that we keep coming back to, which is like these sort of individual survival strategies under patriarchy in a misogynist society, right? That they can only take us so far. At the same time, like, I don't know, I feel like I love a lot of this stuff, like especially the decentering men mentality, maybe just like in a broader way of like, how much time do you spend looking at your phone and waiting for a text, right? Or like obsessing over like a dude who like doesn't want to text you back, you know, or literally just like on your kids, on your husband, you know, versus friends, community, collective action. But yeah, it's interesting because then, as you say, like then some of it starts to just become a walking contradiction. It becomes so all consuming, like the resistance of desiring men, that actually it's just recentering men.
Yes, right. And I mean, so much, there's a lot of nuance here, right? Like I remember talking to this young woman at the bookstore and being like, I love this for you. Like I love that you're exploring this, you know? And obviously I think there's so much value to the essential ideas here, but then I just worry about like when, you know, it starts being like, oh, well, you're a pick-me. if you, you know, care too much or feel too much, or, you know, it's like that self-discipline piece. It just feels so punishing, right? And so, I mean, I think there's so many of these, like, these phenomena online that is trying to help women navigate patriarchy, dating and loving and sexing in patriarchy. There are nuggets of truth that can be totally helpful, but, you know, it can sometimes flip over to this, like, you know, neoliberal girl bossy kind of go out and get yours kind of vibe that is, feels cold and punishing and kind of cruel to the women, you know?
Yeah. Well, I do think that, like, internal discipline and surveillance that you mentioned, I think that's a really interesting point. Like, when it becomes this constant checking yourself mentality, are you really sort of, like I said, decentering men at all? But, you know, it seemed like at the time there was just more generally like a vibe of men that was like happening even pre-election. But it was also like, I'm going to do something about it. You know, I'm going to change my life, and I'm going to change the way that I approach heterosexuality, and I'm going to change the way I think about motherhood or marriage. You know, young women who are like, maybe I don't want to have kids, or maybe I don't want to get married. Like, we do have, I think a lot of us have a lot more choice and agency in how we navigate like sex and romance and dating than we like to think. And so, like, of course, as you said, it's like, it's this slippery thing because we also can't choose our way out of systemic collective problems and culture, like the misogynist power structures that exist in all of our relationships. You know, that's like the same old issue with like affirmative consent, right? Like, just saying, you know, that affirmative consent should be the gold standard, of course, but a lot of women feel pressured or coerced into certain sexual situations, right? So you have to think bigger about the culture and think more collectively. But yeah, I think that's what interested me about that time, is that at least women were like, we need to start doing things differently here.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think too, like, there is something very appealing about that, because I think we were in the wake of the explosion of the concept of hetero pessimism or hetero fatalism, part of the critique being that women are not doing anything about it, right?
Exactly.
That they're just sort of existing and persisting in this misery of, you know, hetero existence, but not exiting it, not reimagining hetero culture, you know? And so, but this feels like potentially, you could say, an attempt at reimagining heteroculture, right? Like, depending on the application of it, decentering men, it's like, well, it's not completely opting out of loving and having sex with men. It's saying, like, what would it look like to have men not be the center of your universe, right? So, I mean,
seems great. Seems like a good idea.
Seems like a good idea. Which, like, so much of, like, the problematics of these things, it's like how they then manifest online, which I think is so relevant to talking about 4B and what happened with 4B, right? Because you can have the concept, the idea, these like fundamental values, and then you have this like proliferation online via a million TikTok videos and influencers who have their own agenda in terms of like promoting, you know, their YouTube video, their guide to decentering men, like that whole thing, and
their podcast,
which, you know, exactly, right?
Totally. No, I so agree. I mean, it's like, as we discussed with the red flags, you know, bit, like the internet just like ruins everything, or it can take an interesting idea and just make it like this big messy thing. I just remember, like, at that time, like right before the election and then up to the election, like I was so frustrated in my life that like my life seemed to center around my kids and marriage and my partner. And, you know, I think that's what ultimately led me to really like ask some big questions about marriage. And like, it just felt so unfulfilling. And it wasn't like my partner was pressuring me to do that. It was like marriage and just like the sort of like narrowing of my life, you know, that happened after I had kids. It sort of tricked me into just centering nuclear family existence. And so I was feeling like this intense desire to like get away from that and like rethink like my relationships with you know, women and friends and my community and, you know, everyone, anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also this intense desire to take a break from sex. And, you know, I had written about it a little bit in my book. And like, I just wanted to like reset my body. Like, I just wanted to reset my relationship with sex. And to do that, I felt like I needed to pause, but I was married. So I was like, am I allowed to do that? You know, not that again, like my partner was saying that I wasn't, but it just immediately felt like that must mean something is wrong.
Yeah.
So all of which is to say, like, I was sort of in like a kind of unintentional or like, I didn't know why I was doing it really at the time, but voluntary celibacy, and had been for a while, like leading up to the election.
Yeah.
So then seeing 4B pop up, I was like, okay, like I kind of get what these ladies are feeling. And I think we should also say that, like, not only was all this bubbling up because the election was looming and then really, you know, after the election exploding, but also taking a longer range view. This is all post Me Too, you know, when I was talking to women who were re-exploring consent in their marriage, that was very much informed by what we learned from Me Too, but also the pandemic, which I think really changed how we talk about marriage and intimacy and alone time.
Absolutely.
And the first Trump presidency again. So, you know, it's like women's discontent with their own, you know, lack of autonomy, like in their personal lives, in their political lives, in politics, like in policy. And especially like more and more white women, I think, who, and, you know, more middle class women who maybe had not yet felt the effects of systems of power. You know, in the past 10 or so years, I think a lot of them have been radicalized, you know, as those threats touch them a little bit more closely.
Right. So you have all of this burbling up very powerfully.
Right.
And then
God.
Dun, dun, dun.
Like, could it get worse?
Yeah.
And then Trump is elected.
Yep. Yeah. And that's when it really explodes. Like, you had all these different conversations happening, and then it became all about 4B, right? It felt like 4B became a way to express outrage, anger, sorrow, all of the feelings in response to the election results, right? And it wasn't just the election results. It was the misogynistic crowing that happened after Trump's win, like Nick Fuentes saying, "Your body, my choice forever." So there was a call and response aspect to all of this. This sort of like, I own you, and then, no, you don't. Immediately after the election, the Google Trends search term skyrocketed for 4B.
Right.
Like, there was just this like crazy peak suddenly, clear as day, that people were responding to the election. There were videos where women announced that they were going 4B, they were shaving their heads, which was another nod to the South Korean context where women had shaved their heads to protest oppressive beauty norms. Here's a sampling of post-election headlines. In the New York Times, it was, after the election, a call for women to swear off men. In Teen Vogue, the 4B movement has become a refuge for women tired of toxic men. The Washington Post said, Trump win spurs interest in 4B, fringe South Korean movement to swear off men.
And this was like right after the election, right? I remember it just like, the headlines
immediately
just kept coming.
Took off, yeah.
Yeah, and then it like shifted, I think. I mean, it shifted in terms of what it had been before the election. Like you said, like this became about expressing frustration toward not just this election and the win, but like the continued inequities of, you know, relationships with men, just being like in this misogynist culture, right? And a kind of like refusal to participate in that anymore. Active desperation, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is that we're talking about kind of like the personal meeting the political here. You know, it was like, I see this out there happening. I understand it affects me and my body, and I am going to make this choice
Yeah.
Now, what it turned into, we need to discuss.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at this point in its trajectory, it's clear that there were a lot of different things going on. Some women were hoping that this idea would take off, that it would genuinely become a powerful and influential and country-changing movement by way of this viral idea of sexual and romantic refusal.
Right. Which it did not. But yeah, there was that, like, maybe this could be like the new face of feminism energy behind it. Like, is this the women's march of the second Trump term? And I saw a lot of critique of 4B in that sort of language of like, no, we're not gonna do the pink pussy hat thing again, right? But like,
right.
But it felt more guerrilla, you know. It felt more like a movement that had some teeth. I mean, wearing a pink pussy hat is different from shaving your head and being like, fuck it, I'm not going to participate in heterosexuality with men anymore. It felt definitely like more radical and, you know, more aggressive than the corporate feminism of the girl boss, you know, of the 2010s. So it did feel like more radical to me, which is, I think, is why I was so surprised by like the immediate dismissive response to it. Right. That said, it wasn't really a movement because there were no clear demands attached. I don't think there was any organizing really offline. Not that, you know, we haven't seen effective online movements before, but there was no like real on the ground component. It was like all these just creators posting stuff. Which, to be fair, is like how Me Too started, but it did turn into something, I think, you know, that was more about changing systems.
Right. Yeah, and you had these other angles going on. Like some women were using a declaration around going for B as a tool for emotional expression and impact, I would say. Like it was a way of saying, this is how distraught I am by the state of this country. So many of the videos in retrospect feel like an expression of feeling more than anything, more than like certainly like political organizing, right? And so some women were also using the meme to perform a kind of dejected and cynical comedy. Like I think many of us have seen a friend do a similar thing after a breakup of like, I'm swearing off men, I'll be celibate for the rest of my life, you know? So there's like an unseriousness to it. And some women were clinging to it as a tool of endurance and survival. Like a lot of women were specifically saying that they were going for B for the next 4 years. They were looking at the landscape of reproductive rights rollbacks and growing misogyny under a Trump presidency and saying like, this is how I will get through this.
Right. And that's like the internet of it all too, right? Again, is that it was like, it was this meme that was taken up. It was an online trend, as I wrote, like at the time. It wasn't really a movement, although we were sort of critiquing it as though it was right away. You know, but it was different from something like Me Too, which had these clearer demands of like calling out sexual abusers for harassment and, you know, telling your story because, you know, these are stories that are not often told. And it's, you know, we could talk about critiques of Me Too and being too carceral or punitive, right? But it had like a direction, I guess. But I also remember seeing a lot of critiques of 4B at the time that were around like the way in which it was like this emotional expression that's very characteristic of Gen Z, right? Of just like crying online, you know. And I kind of like hated to see like so many people dump on and trivialize this generation, these women, you know, like, I don't know. There's some, I still think there's some value in that feeling, you know. And to me, like, it was not a movement, it was a trend thing. And so it was aesthetic, you know, and it was performative in a way that I guess I found interesting. You know, a lot of political gestures can just be performances. They can be these aesthetic displays, and that could be it, right? But I remember you and I talking about 4B right after, and like the immediate backlash to it, and both of us feeling like, at the very least, we understood the emotional experience.
Exactly. Well, right. To me, I think I had plenty of critiques of the idea of it as a movement, right?
Yeah.
But like fundamentally experienced a feeling of empathy for what was being expressed, and certainly shared some of that feeling, you know? And I think for me, there was this prevailing feeling of like, can we not allow women their emotions right now?
Can they just freak out online? Like, can we not have like 1,000 think pieces? Like,
and are we really
them
critiquing women right now? Like, is that like, Trump just won?
Right. But that has continued.
Yeah, it sure has.
I think it was like that pivot point where suddenly it was like, actually, no, we need to talk about men right now, which I know we'll get into a little bit later in the show, but I wanted to talk to you about like how you were feeling in your body at that time, because I know it's something that we discussed a lot at that time.
I actually, I'm flashing back to, we went on our friend Sarah Wheeler's podcast to talk about all of this, I believe. And I ended up crying on the podcast. Like, that's like where I was at that time. Like, I like broke down in tears because of that motherfucker. Like, that guy, there was something about his little taunting thing, which I know I hate that I let it get to me, you know, because it's designed as a troll, right? But his little face was like looping in my mind at that time when I tried to have sex, you know, when I wanted to, then his little face popped up saying that. So I remember this feeling of like alienation from my own body and this feeling of bodily shutdown where I did not want him or Trump's election to, you know, steal this from me, to steal this part of my life, you know? And yet I did not, for a time, just did not feel like I could go there. And I felt so distraught about that, right? Like, and I think that's hence the crying on our friend's podcast, because in a way that I totally hadn't even been able to predict, that I would not even be able to like finish my sentence because I found it so upsetting. Yeah. So there was this sort of like, it was showing up in my body in a way that I couldn't control, you know? And then that was followed like weeks later by really a wish to like reclaim sex and this like desperate desire to not let them take it from me. And so for me, it was a roller coaster of emotion, from going from like total shutdown in a way that I didn't feel like I had any control over, to returning to sex and having it feel like something that I was reclaiming for myself. Yeah. Where were you at that time?
Oh God, it was such a mess. You know, I think I was really at the point when divorce was sort of crystallizing, and I just remember feeling like, honestly, I just remember feeling extremely dysregulated and emotional. And, you know, so I had already kind of been like, I'm taking this like, you know, intentional break from sex, you know, being celibate. So it's not that I felt that anyone was taking that from me at the time, but I don't know. I think I just felt like such a mess in terms of my relationships with everybody. I remember you and I too talking about like there was so much reactivity to the 4B stuff. Yep. And there was so much kind of like paranoia and infighting among like progressives. And of course we are like public people, like we write regularly, and it was like just a very like weird time. Because I remember was a mess.
Everyone was a mess. And I remember we kept saying to each other, like, I felt like we kept having these like huddles where we'd be like,
totally,
you know, like, what's going on? Like, did you see that thing that so-and-so said? And then, and I remember this like repeated refrain of like, no one is okay right now. Yeah. Like people are saying wild things. Like none of us are okay. But I remember we kept having this kind of like touch point of like where there was a sense of trust that like I felt like we were on, like in different places, but on a similar wavelength in terms of like how we were feeling about what was being discussed in that moment. And that I was like so grateful for that, because I think it helped me to feel a little bit more grounded and like I wasn't losing my mind.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah, no, lots of gut checks. I remember us just, texting and just like, am I crazy? What is happening? Because I think right at that moment we were seeing also that big pivot to what about the men? What about the male loneliness and everything that we're dealing with now? And women need to stop complaining, So like, I do think that was part of that 4B reaction,
Yeah.
And, we should say that a lot of that was mixed up with like election results coming in and realizing that white women had, voted overwhelmingly for Trump. And so there was a lot of those critiques about 4B. And, it seemed to me online like it was actually a pretty diverse movement.
Yeah.
But still, it was like, this isn't just about gender. It isn't just about misogyny, right? Obviously, it's an intersectional power problem that we were all dealing with, to put it lightly, Yeah. But I think it was a really, really disorienting time. And so the notion of refusal made sense to me,
Yeah. Well, and I know we were both at the time thinking about our own relationships to refusal, including in the past. Like in my 20s, my experience with threatening to stop sleeping with a bad boy was partly out of a hope for him to
sleep with you again.
To behave different. Well, yeah. Essentially, for like, my hope was that I remember threatening to stop sleeping with this man, in hopes that he would behave differently.
Yeah.
And so like, but I also was wanting to protect like my body and my heart from his bullshit. So there was, I think I was relating to it on that level of this like prior experience of like the wilds of dating in your 20s and, a little bit feeling used and abused. And that sense of conflict of like wanting to keep sleeping with someone, but like knowing that I shouldn't, and also like wanting sex to kind of be a tool for getting him to change,
like a manipulation tactic. And I say that like with a full heart of empathy, because I totally I think that's a very common experience for heterosexual women, because we are taught that is where our power comes from, is sex and sexuality. And in a sense, like, it is where a lot of power lies for women in heterosexual dating.
Yes.
So it makes sense to kind of like use that. I remember, it's so funny because I probably did the opposite. Like, I would probably, sleep with the bad boys to try to change them. But I don't know, maybe I also kind of like, dangled sex.
Well, I think I did both, right? Like, I think,
you try it all.
Yeah, whatever works. Yeah. I mean, none of it worked, so.
Right. But I don't think none of it worked at all.
No.
I don't think that, because bad boys never change.
Yeah.
I don't think that I ever really thought of like sexual refusal as like a political gesture. That was something like I had never really entertained until I think I was married, because it was like, it felt, the terms of what I was supposed to do felt so clear, that it was like a regular, obligatory appointment sex situation. And again, like, this is just like what I kind of had absorbed about marriage. This was not like, even, my partner like sitting me down and saying like, this is what I require. It was just that like being in that container of marriage made me feel that way.
Yeah.
And so I started to feel like, no, like, I want to push back against that. I think as I was getting older too, I was just kind of like wanting to refuse, whatever like sort of structures of power I could. But yeah, I think that was like the first time I really started to think of like sexual refusal in this more political context. Whereas when I was young, it was just like, I was more unthinking about it, I guess.
Right. That makes sense. Where would you say that you are now with how you're feeling in your body, but also how you're feeling about this notion of refusal?
Well, this is an paywalled episodes. I won't say too much, but I I think I've only recently gotten to a point where I think I understand like some of the ways that people were sort of reactively responding to 4B, and actually like along the lines of what you were describing more, I don't want this huge political gut punch to take away pleasure and love and sex from my life, because fuck those guys, you know, like, and I think for me, actually taking a break from sex and really understanding like what were all the things that I was thinking about it or bringing to it or not talking about or not thinking about, has allowed me to get to a point where now I feel like I don't want past shitty men, shitty narratives about love and sex and relationships to dictate how I live my life and to, you know, lead me to a life where I feel like everything is refusal, you know, where I'm refusing my own pleasure, you know? Yeah. So I think that's kind of where I am. And to be clear, like, I don't think 4B as a meme, as a movement, as whatever, was ever telling other women to like stop having sex or getting theirs. I don't know. Maybe there's some content that was like, you should do this too. But I think that collectively we sort of made a mistake critiquing the movement, at least on those terms. Like there's other valid critiques to explore. I think that perhaps that feeling that so many were having was a response to these shitty men in power who were, in a sense, threatening to take away, you know, this really important part of so many people's lives.
Right, but the anger got directed at women.
As it does. How were you feeling a year later?
I mean, honestly, right now I am feeling very connected to my body, to my partner, and to this little pocket of, not to be cringe, but
Be
care and pleasure and fun and collaboration that we carve out together. I don't think that the partnership or love or sex that we have is going to defeat fascism, to be clear.
Too bad.
But unfortunately, but I do see it as quietly resistant, I would say. I think that's largely because we are frequently questioning heteronormative gender roles, the suffocating constraints of the nuclear family, the mythology of monogamy, all of these things. We're very frequently questioning them. We're making fun of them. We're kind of messing with them, pushing up against them, and talking about them. And I think that shows up at the dinner table. It shows up in the bedroom. And those shared critiques have taken us to some very cool places. That said, I am also thinking constantly about the safe harbor of a happy marriage, of a happy relationship, and what it means politically to find private pleasures that take me out of the fight and out of the outrage, and that also make me into a collaborator with these systems that I ideologically oppose. I actually wrote down this little quote from the philosopher Theodore Adorno.
Oh, we know him.
I know that guy. If love in society is to represent a better one, it cannot do so as a peaceful enclave, but only by conscious opposition.
Ooh. My head's exploding.
I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, also my hope is that we don't throw out, like, these notions of, well, refusal, the pause, the boy sobriety, right? Decentering men. Like, I think that is really valuable because you can have, like, what you're talking about, you know, without sex and romance becoming, like, the center of one's life and fully sort of taking you out of the fight, like whatever that looks like for you, you know. And yeah, you don't have to like then swear off this quietly resistant exploration of sex and love, which is so much of where we figure out how to relate to people, you know? And I know, you know, I've been reading this Dean Spade book, Love in a Fucked Up World, and it's so good. I think what I'm thinking a lot about is just like how we structure our lives around hetero monogamy, and what are the ways that we can resist that? What are the ways that I can resist that? Just in terms of how much time I give to other things and other people outside of that. I think too, like something that I've been thinking a lot about is just how, like, at least within hetero monogamous marriage, right, we expect to get and receive everything from one partner, you know, and a man in a heterosexual context for women. And the pressure that puts on relationships, you know, to get and receive emotional fulfillment, sexual fulfillment, friendship, domestic companionship, you know, and domestic like co-working, co-parenting, you know, and then is it political and social fulfillment that you're looking to a partner for? And, you know, I think it's bad for relationships. I think it's bad for individuals. I think it's bad for society. And it's totally something that I got very sucked into. So I'm really kind of trying to think about how to push back against that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking a lot in terms of expanding notions of love and care and eroticism too. Earlier this year, I read this book, Federica Gregorato's Love Troubles. She writes about this sense of an erotic we between lovers, but also friends, activists, neighbors, whomever. And she writes, they make love, converse, act together, and undergo effects they do not entirely grasp, and come to figure out crucial things about themselves and about the world in which they live, which I think speaks to some of what you were saying earlier in terms of being able to learn about ourselves, about the world that we're living in through our relationships, ideally not just through our romantic relationships, you know, that we can expand these notions of love and care and eroticism beyond just that dyad.
Totally.
Yeah, so I'm just like thinking about what does it look like to expand love and care and eroticism beyond love relationships, beyond the nuclear family. I'm still figuring that out.
It looks like starting a podcast with your friend who helped, who we both helped get each other through the election.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
I mean, yeah, honestly.
It's not,
you know?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or as we did recently, gathering with some women and looking at the dick pics that they are receiving and analyzing if it's real or photoshopped.
that did happen. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that like maybe some of what we're talking about here like are more with some distance, some of our like perspectives on eroticism and sex and love right now like is perhaps the sentiment that was like underneath some of the more swift and dismissive early reaction to 4B. Yeah. You know, like we said, like there were certainly valid critiques that showed up, you know, alongside some more questionable backlash.
Yes. Yeah. Should we look at some of the valid critiques first? I think the feminist writer Sophie Lewis nicely captured the critiques in this series of tweets here.
Yes, she really seemed to be somebody that folks gravitated to for kind of parsing like what was happening. And she essentially argued that like kind of individualistic separatist rejection of men, especially online, is not a solution to all of the things that ail us. And she argued that like feminism has to think collectively. So like a lot of what we've been saying, and specifically it has to more clearly position itself as a movement against monogamous, heterosexual maternal norms and against that kind of privatization of the nuclear family, right? Where like everything happens within that unit. And she also argued in pretty precise terms what I have also argued, which is that, you know, rejecting just the domestic sphere or just the public sphere. So like the trad culture rejects work for women, of course, only. And maybe the true dire heterofatalists and the forebeers and the girl bossers, you know, reject family, domestic life. You know, but none of that addresses the sexual division of labor that is foundational to, you know, white supremacist patriarchal capitalism, right? That it still stays, you know, nor does it address like the other mechanisms of capitalism and patriarchy that exert power over all of us. And I think you also interviewed Sophie at the time. Is that right?
I did. And one of the things that resonated most with me that she said was this. There's a notion that men are essentially a different, unredeemable kind of species here, right? Is it really the case that men are unredeemable, that they can never be incorporated into a comradely coexistence with us? I find that a terribly nihilistic worldview. And she went on to argue for more utopian, trans-inclusive, liberatory projects interested in liberating all people, communizing care, and abolishing the family. Everybody should go read Sophie's book, Abolish the Family, by the way. It's fantastic. And again, it speaks to this push back against the nuclear family and monogamy, you know, motherhood, the whole piece of it,
right?
As a controlling force.
And as like an organizing structure for like everything in our lives and in our like social policy. Yeah. And it's funny when you were reading the quote, Sophie's quote, I was like, I definitely felt that way, that men are unredeemable and, you know, but obviously like I don't believe in essentialist notions of gender, blah, blah, blah.
Well, and I think
it is like a feeling that women have sometimes.
It's a feeling. We
need to let them have it.
Right. I mean, I guess that is the thing, especially when we're talking about this like meme as it showed up online in a very emotional moment. You know, I think there was a lot of it that was this emotional expression of being fed up, of feeling hopeless, right? And I think a lot of women were having a hard time summoning a hopeful utopian vision in that moment, right? And so I think we can say, I think both things are totally true, which is that people were feeling that way as a just statement of fact. And also we should be reaching towards these utopian visions. Like, please let us dream and have visions of what it looks like to have men as comrades. You know,
it's a hard vision to hold sometimes. I will admit, some feel kind of unredeemable, but I mean, obviously, like we see men in power who are like unredeemable,
right?
But I think it is important to note that like Sophie's argument here is like quite different from some of the calls that we saw post-election that were about coddling men. Yeah. Being nicer to men, thanking them for voting. It was such a strange time because I did feel like as all of our nervous systems were in overdrive, like that, like these two equally like not great paths for feminism were presenting themselves, like placating men and sort of more deeply recentering men in our lives and in our politics. Right. And I do think we're really leaning in that direction now.
We are. Yeah.
And then the other side, at least it felt like, well, in 4B it was, right? Like rejecting men altogether. Yeah. And I think we're still struggling to see a path that is not that binary.
Yeah. So now as a meme, I would say it's next to non-existent, although weirdly just yesterday I posted a clip of our episode on red flags to TikTok and a lone woman responded, "Join the 4B movement." So, you know, some people are still doing that thing.
Right. I mean, I still feel like power to them. Didn't she say though that you should like stop sleeping with the enemy?
Yeah.
Stop sleeping with the enemy.
I think that was part of the message. Yeah. Which I think was going to be the title of this podcast initially. We were talking about sleeping with the enemy is, right? Wasn't that going to be?
It was, yes. And I still love it. Because there was another podcast with that name. I think we had to not do it.
Yeah.
I mean, because there is just sometimes that is something that I think that straight women have to contend with under loving and sexing and dating under patriarchy, which is also like our new tagline, apparently.
I know.
You know, is that sometimes it does feel that way, you know, and sometimes you actually might be, you know, sleeping with a man who hates women and, you know, doesn't value women as human and or sussing out like, are you the enemy, you know? And I think, you know, everything that we're talking about is like, what is the best political way forward, right? But I think as an artist and as like a human, I'm always most interested in just like, what are people feeling that is maybe not the correct feeling, right? But it is nevertheless like what a lot of women are feeling.
Right. Well, and I think like seeing the near total death of this conversation helps us to have some perspective on the sheer amount of attention that this meme/movement got.
Right.
And it actually, like, doing this research, it made me mad, really, to think of just how much critique there was,
right.
Just how much sort of gawking media noise there was,
right.
and then it just disappeared.
Right.
You know, it totally evaporated, right? And so there was such a sense of like threat and consequence, and now it's gone, you know? And so it does, in retrospect, feel like this very harsh coming down upon what were essentially, you know, women's complaints, women's feelings in a terrible moment.
Which again continues. There's definitely that vibe that continues of like women are not delivering their message correctly.
Yeah.
And the way that they are delivering their complaints is the problem, not the content of the complaints, which is male supremacy often and a culture of violence against women that they're reacting to. I think their response to 4B2 like really made me question the possibility of, you know, resistance movements that are like a little out there and radical, like ever taking off again. Like it's concerning. It's like something about the online landscape. And I'm not saying that like any political performance or movement or action should be above critique. Like I wrote about that after the election. Like absolutely we should have those conversations, but especially when it comes to inclusivity and, you know, like turfy feminisms, like do not support, right? But I guess what I'm saying is that I also felt like there was misogyny and possibly just like plain old reactivity, which is maybe fair. It was post-election and progressives, liberals were like freaking out, myself included. Right. But I wondered like at the time, and I still wonder, like, was there something valuable in what was happening in this notion of 4B and this rejection, this refusal that was squashed and that could have been developed or furthered had it not been shut down, you know, so quickly? And maybe just more simply, like, why did it make men and women so angry that women were saying no to sex and dating?
Right.
And in the end, it went nowhere. So there was all these like sort of hypotheticals about, oh, this is just going to make men angrier, you know, or that it was somehow taking away women's sexual autonomy, even though, again, we know like some women posting stuff on TikTok, they're not the biggest threat to women's autonomy.
Autonomy, right.
But, you know, none of that, like you said, none of it materialized. Like the only thing I think that really materialized was like a deeper skepticism of feminism.
Yes, that is so true. And we've just seen that play out over the last many months. And so in a way, you know, I feel like the response to 4B overall, like as much as there were pockets of criticism that I was fully aligned with, am still fully aligned with, and really like heartily agree with in terms of like an actual political analysis and a sort of forward-looking vision.
Yeah.
But then there was like how the critique manifested on social media and in mainstream news outlets and on like Substack and, you know, stuff like that, where it felt really mocking and vitriolic. And it feels now at like part of this shifting narrative that we're talking about that's really feels punishing to women, that is really about, but what about the men? Please think of the men.
Right.
And that also feels really rooted in fear too. Like you're saying, like, oh, this is going to make men angry. You know, I think like a lot of these reactions feel rooted in a fear of men, actually, and the way that, you know, men and, you know, misogyny have come to great power in this country. And this, what sometimes feels almost like a survival strategy of like, well, don't make them mad. You know, we can't stop sleeping with them.
Yes.
We have to think about their loneliness. We have to, you know.
Right. Or, and I've been thinking this since the election, like a kind of identification with the oppressor.
Yes.
You know? Yeah. I mean, I guess like, as we're talking about this, like my more hopeful like perspective is that maybe that was just a flurry of like, this is not it, you know? And then like other women were like, no, this is exactly it. Like, this makes a lot of sense. And that maybe we are sort of slowly moving toward the kinds of conversations that you and I are having right now, you know?
Well,
that, like,
right. Would we be here right now, honestly?
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for all of that. I mean, because like I think like honestly a lot of like our kind of like putting our heads together arose in this moment of conflict, I think, where we were sort of disagreeing with a lot of things that were being said out there and wanting to do those gut checks. I've felt like very pleasantly challenged by, for example, like Sophie Lewis's response to the movement and some of her visioning around, you know, utopia, right? Like, you know, and so like I think this sort of like keeping your eye on the prize. And so yeah, if we take a longer view, maybe all of this is part of getting to a better, deeper conversation
To the utopia.
to the
sure hope
utopia.
so.
I am
really
actually,
hope
by
so,
the way,
Tracy.
for Bay Area listeners, I will be doing a utopia book club. Well, more to
I was
come on
wondering
that.
what's happening with that. Yeah.
That is happening. You know, like I've been obsessed with reading about utopia for a very long time. And then I think, you know, honestly, Sophie Lewis's point about like that kind of utopian, like, you know, visioning really cemented that for me. And so it's something I've been thinking about a lot.
I was just going to say it's so interesting because I think right around the time of 4B, there was also like a lot of interest in separatism. Like I just remember it coming up in like group chats and stuff. And I kind of feel like some of that interest has dissipated. And partially, I think that's because we tend to think of like the history of feminist separatism as a utopian, right, vision, as being inherently turfy and problematic. And certainly there were strains of that, but there was also like a lot of different separatist movements.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were like some, you know, communes of women who like moved, you know, on like off the grid to farms and then realized that they were all like white privileged ladies and they couldn't handle it, right? Like, so there were certainly like failed separatist movements, rejections of men, right, that 4B's descended from. But there were also separatist movements that just simply were like, we're not going to be in solidarity with men who aren't here for our liberation. And that's like a pretty simple concept, you know.
I'm
like,
so down with that. Yeah.
and that were like very much in alignment with like at the time, second wave feminism, like what was called the gay movement, you know, and really understood like that need to be in solidarity with, you know, not just straight, cis, white, middle class women, you know. So I think like turning back to these histories and their failures, you know, are really valuable. There's also, I just did a reading group with my newsletter on the Combahee River Collective's sort of like statement. And we had such a great discussion about it. But, you know, that was a Black socialist feminist movement that really rejected separatism and the swearing off of men, understanding that, you know, Black women and Black men needed to be in solidarity, you know, over racial oppression. But there's also a really interesting line in their statement that's like, this is not actually quite the same for white women. So I just think there's so much like to explore about, like, yeah, what, when we talk about these things, when we talk about refusal, rejection, separation, what has failed, what has been, what utopian dreams could we learn from?
Yes, exactly. Let's read about these histories. Also, I have been really enjoying, like I mentioned the book earlier, Love Troubles. You mentioned Dean Spade's book. Another book that I recently really enjoyed was Radical Intimacy by Sophie K. Rosa. And it's less about refusal than it is re-envisioning possibilities. It's a critique of love and sex under capitalism. And she calls for readers to imagine ways to reorganize our lives. I feel like we're just like constantly talking about how we organize our lives. Well, she's calling on people to imagine different ways of organizing our lives and pursuing new forms of intimacy. Again, not just romantic intimacy, but all forms of intimacy and connection and love. And she has this line that I love: experiments in living and relating matter because, amidst everyday and structural violence, they can expand the realm of the possible and prefigure the future. She writes about feminist and queer forms of relating that decenter the couple, that expand our ideas of love and intimacy beyond just the romantic and the sexual, and that just generally resist patriarchal relationships. And she also talks about making sexual politics a threat again. And I love that because we've seen the total defanging of sexual politics by way of, you know, lean-in style sex positivity. You know, I feel like I don't have any easy answers here. I don't have any easy solutions. But I am sitting with these questions, you know, I'm sitting with questions about how do we move beyond the, you know, performative distancing of heteropessimism, right?
Exactly.
What does actual distancing look like? You know, 4B is one approach of refusal. There are others.
Totally. And I think that's like the value that I see and saw in these online trends and these like new languages that, you know, everyday women were trying to create around decentering men, around boys' sobriety. You know, 4B is like this real attempt to move beyond that sort of immobilized, maybe like heteropessimism that is just men, and then going back to, you know, the same old ways of organizing and structuring your life. And I think that those trends like are evolving. They are continuing. I think there is more interest in like a lot of these concepts that you're talking about, you know, and that people have been talking about for a very, very long time. I guess I'm hopeful that like seeing some of these things go mainstream, like it's just shaking up the heterosexual institutions that really structure everything, you know, our social policies and our politics. So I think we just need to keep pushing, and it can be in small ways, you know. I think the conversations that we're having are all about that. Like how do we do that? Like, what is the nitty gritty of that? Because I think sometimes people can hear these concepts of like abolish the family or, you know, even like decenter men and feel like, what does that mean for me and my life? For me and my, you know, and my economic needs. And, you know, I think that's what we're doing is trying to break down like what can it look like in the everyday.
Yeah. Well, and I think the truth is that when we talked about starting this podcast, I think it came very much from a place of wanting to talk through ideas together and figure stuff out together, you know? And so I know that we want this to be a space where that can happen. You know, these episodes are so well researched. We spent hours and hours.
Way too much time.
Way too much time, honestly, you know, producing these. But
Right.
I also know that we are like really serious about wanting to treat it as a space to not, you know, be experts, to not have answers, and to be asking questions and figuring stuff out together and with you listeners, you know, that we need that right now, you know?
Yes, right. And that I know that we are also both in our everyday lives, like in the most intimate spaces of our lives, trying to figure out what does this all look like, you know? And those are things that's like, it's, you know, the personal does remain political, and like really restoring some awareness of like what that means, and the complexities of like actually living as though that were true, I think is also, you know, something that we're trying to figure out, talk through.
Yeah. So stick around. We need each other.
And pay us.
Also, if you could pay us for this work that we're doing, that would be cool.
That would be cool, because that way we can keep doing it.
Yeah. Are we going to keep this part in? Maybe we will.
Yeah, I think we should.
Pay us.